The doorbell rang right as I was flipping pancakes. One of those crisp, frost-on-the-glass Saturday mornings where the coffee tastes like a victory and the kids are busy arguing over who gets the last bite. I wiped my flour-covered hands on a towel, muttered something about whoever was outside better be bringing more syrup, and swung the door open. Instead of a neighbor or a delivery guy, there was this kid in a gray windbreaker, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. He handed me a thick, heavy envelope with urgent legal notice stamped in aggressive red ink, then turned and bolted back to his truck before I could even ask what the hell was going on. I closed the door, tossed the towel, and tore that envelope open with the cold, practiced precision of a guy who's had to deal with way too many court orders in his life. But what I read, that made me drop onto the entryway bench like I'd just been hit in the gut with a sack of wet cement. The notice claimed the Crystal Shores Homeowners Association had seized my land. My land. Over 1,000 acres of woods, fields, and a beautiful little lake that's been in my family since before most of these people were even born. They cited delinquent dues and covenantal breach for things like overgrown brush and an unauthorized structure, which I assume was the century-old barn my great-grandfather built by hand. I let out this short, sharp, involuntary laugh that felt like glass in my throat. See, I'm not part of Crystal Shores. I'm the guy who lives next to their manicured, beige-colored utopia of lawn-obsessed robots. My property was carved into the county records decades before they drew a single blueprint for their little gated heaven. But here it was in black and white, a notice of sale. My land gone. I didn't even finish the coffee. I grabbed my keys, ignored the kids' questions, and tore down to the municipal recorder's office. The clerk there, a woman I'd known for years, looked at the papers and went pale. It had been filed electronically by some shell company I'd never heard of, Shoreline Title Holdings, acting on behalf of the HOA. They'd used some shady GIS loophole to digitally carve off my southern sector and bundle it in with their own lots. It was a classic, dirty land grab maneuver designed to pass through the system unnoticed until some developer was already pouring concrete over your favorite fishing spot. I drove back home with my blood boiling, and sure enough, there were people in orange vests already walking my trails, hammering survey flags into the ground. A laminated sign stood by the lake. Future Community Park, private access only. I was staring at that sign, wondering if I should start swinging a shovel when my phone buzzed. It was Meredith Walker, the HOA president. "Mr. Harper," she purred, sounding like she was reading from a script for a corporate takeover. "We understand this is difficult, but we're correcting a historic oversight. You have 72 hours to vacate." I hung up and didn't even bother yelling. I just went home, sat in my office, and started building an arsenal. I didn't have a lawyer yet, but I had every deed, every tax record, and every survey map my family had kept since the 50s. I spent the night drinking coffee that tasted like battery acid and turning my desk into a fortress of paper. When I walked in the county court the next day, I didn't just bring a lawyer. I brought enough certified, notarized, and historically impossible to deny evidence to make that judge realize the HOA was trying to pull a fast one that would have embarrassed a high school student. The judge looked at the HOA's junior associate, a kid in a blazer 3 sizes too big who was sweating through his collar, and basically told him to go sit in the corner. Injunction granted. Transactions frozen. The look on Meredith's face when I walked out of that courthouse and started reading the court order to her survey crew, well, that was the first real highlight of my week. But they weren't done. Oh no, they were just getting started. They filed a ridiculous counterclaim, citing some made-up legacy integration agreement that didn't even have a signature on it. It was like they were trying to fight a war with nothing but bad intentions and bad paperwork. That's when I decided, if they wanted to play real estate, I was going to show them how it's done. My contact at the county office helped me find the cracks in their armor. Turns out that 25-acre lakefront strip of mine wasn't just legally mine. It was technically flexible use. I could do whatever I wanted with it, subdivide it, lease it, or turn it into the loudest, most chaotic neighbor they could possibly imagine. I didn't just fight back. I went on the offensive. I subdivided the land right up to the edge of their 5 most expensive lakefront mansions. I'm talking about the guys with the infinity pools and the private docks. I listed those plots, not on the open market, but to specific investors who had zero interest in HOA drama and even less interest in being neighborly. I made sure the HOA board got copies of every listing. I can still see that sticky note I put on the cover. If you like playing real estate games, you're going to love mine. The change in their mood was instant. Suddenly, these people who thought they owned the world realized their sacred lakefront was about to become the site of a high-end, event-hosting, noisy piece of paradise that they couldn't touch. Meredith stopped calling. She sent in the big guns, a polished guy from a downtown firm who billed by the minute and looked like he hated the color of my shirt. We met in my office above the feed store, and he tried to offer me a settlement that wouldn't have covered the tax bill on one of those mansions. I leaned back, looked him right in the eye, and told him his offer was offensive. He threatened me with years of litigation. I told him litigation was my cardio. When the news crew finally showed up after I started leasing space for film shoots and private parties right in their backyard, the irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. Seeing that footage on the evening news, a lady in tennis whites screaming in her phone while a wedding party toasted on a floating barge 30 feet from her dock, that was pure gold. And here's the kicker. I wasn't even breaking the law. I was just for the first time actually using my own land. The emails started pouring in from other people who'd been screwed over by the same shell companies and HOA sharks. I wasn't just fighting for my land anymore. I was part of a bigger collapse. By the time we filed the federal complaint, the whole neighborhood was turning. The board members were starting to look like the villains they actually were. And the neighbors? Well, some of them realized they'd rather be on my side of the fence than stuck behind the wall of the HOA's ego. I remember a woman from one of the mansions, a house I had theoretically encroached on, stopping by to leave a pie at my gate. She thanked me for standing up to them. That was the moment I knew I had them. The final blow wasn't a court ruling, though we got plenty of those. It was the silence. When I stopped answering Meredith's calls, when I let the developers start breaking ground on the wellness retreat, and when the sheriff's deputies came out just to tell me they were rooting for me, that's when the kingdom really started to crumble. The guy with the biggest mansion on the bank, the one who'd probably never talked to a commoner in his life, finally showed up at my office door. He looked like he'd been forced to swallow his own pride and a handful of Xanax just to make the walk. He wanted to talk. He wanted options. I looked at him, thought about everything they tried to steal, and realized that for all their money, for all their fancy gates and beige-colored walls, they were just terrified of losing control. They thought they could bury me in paper, but they forgot one thing. You can't bury someone who owns the ground you're standing on. So, here's what I'm left wondering. Is justice actually about following the rules? Or is it about being the one who's willing to play the game better than the bullies do? Does it matter if I enjoyed the fight a little too much? Or am I just a guy who got pushed too far? I'd really love to hear what you think. Would you have kept fighting? Or would you have just taken the settlement and walked away to keep the peace? Drop a comment below and let me know. And hey, if you've ever had a deal with an HOA or someone trying to walk all over your rights, I want to hear that story too. Share it below. Maybe your experience is the next one we need to talk about.